Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. This is another one of PhocusWire's Zoom side chats, new reality with our kind of weekly. We've had a bit of a break because we had the PhocusWright conference the last 2 or 3 weeks. But this series is brought to you by Medallia. Technology is helping hotels transform up to 80% of guest experiences into contactless interactions. You can learn more from the leader in customer experience at medallia.com. Our very warm thanks to them for supporting this ongoing series. My very warm thanks, just equally as importantly, to welcome Johannes Reck, co-founder and CEO of GetYourGuide. Thank you for the nice wave there. Thanks ever so much, Johannes, for joining us. It's been a little while since you and I have had a chat, but we really appreciate the time. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. Very glad to be on the show today.
So, right, let's kick off then. I mean, we don't really like to dwell too much on what's been going on this year. We're very much thinking about, as the title of the this season suggests, it's the new reality. We want to look forward. But I think it is worth just going over a few things, Johannes, if we can, and just kind of give us a sense, first of all, of what is the kind of the state of the nation, the state of play in tours and activities. Here we are on the 24th of November. The replay version of this will be out tomorrow, but here we are, back end of November. What's the kind of state of play of where we are with things at the moment, Johannes?
I would say it's a very bifurcated view right now. I think the state of the nation as of today is very grim. I mean, we have very little revenue and travel experiences, attractions, tours globally at this point in time. Europe is, in a quasi shutdown. Our industry is basically non-existent right now. In most of the European countries, in the US, it's severely depressed. Most of the other places around the world look the same. And I think it's fair to say that it's like in the way how it is today. Our industry can't exist. That said, I would say I'm more optimistic today than at any other point prior in the pandemic, simply because I believe we have a very strong reason to hope that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that, contrary to my initial expectations, the recovery is actually coming earlier than expected. So I'm very hopeful for first signs of a more robust recovery than in the past year. Come Easter and the summer season, and then certainly I think it's fair to say that I think we'll probably have a full recovery in travel experiences in 2022 for most parts of the world.
Did you get much business over the summer when Europe certainly started easing back on some of its travel restrictions?
Yes, I would call it was a recovery on eggshells. So, yes, we did see a very strong spike, for a couple of weeks. It was very concentrated around July and August. And it was very much driven by domestic and regional travel, and really by you could map the infection patterns, based on our bookings. So, Germans to Amsterdam was a massive corridor, or Hamburg, suddenly was one of our top cities globally, so simply because there were no corona infections there. But it was clear to me, Kevin, I'm not sure if you still remember, but I have a biochemistry degree, so I kind of understand the virology behind it. It was very clear that, come autumn and winter, that this would flip again, unless we had something done completely different, like administer a vaccine, which wasn't the case. So it was clear that this is more temporary. And to be honest, I never looked at the revenue or booking figures this year. My mind was always on how do we position the company best for when the real recovery is going to happen.
And your cause for optimism that you spoke of in your first answer, Johannes, that is based on, I think we've got now a trio, certainly here in the UK, a trio of vaccines that have been announced. Is it that gives you the cause for optimism?
Yes, so I think it was clear that there would be only two ways out of the pandemic: either herd immunity through having enough people infected, which obviously would have been devastating from a healthcare point of view, or a working vaccine. I think the good news is we have 3 working vaccines today. I think 2 of which deploy a very elegant modern technology that might not be the best technology for worldwide use. So third world countries most likely will not have the same access to that vaccine, but I think it's definitely going to work in European countries and in the United States. And thereby, I think, by mid to late next year, the broader travel market, I think in most of our core markets, will be brought back. I'm also incredibly pleased about the development of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which will be much cheaper to produce because it doesn't deploy that new mRNA technology. And also it can survive in just regular refrigerators, meaning that it's much easier to use and deployed in developing countries, which I think is equally important because we all know that a lot of tourism actually happens there, and those economies doing well and those people being healthy is incredibly important to our industry.
Were there any, I ask fairly flippantly, but were there any moments over this year where you perhaps thought my original training as a biochemist may have actually been useful and you could have gone back into doing something like that?
Absolutely. I would have never thought that my training in that discipline, would ever come back to be, useful to that degree. I mean, my family always joked that I was kind of in the wrong profession, being in tourism, with my degree. And, this year they've certainly learned that this is not the case. It really helps you. Certainly, I think from the get-go, I think number one, it was just, I think psychologically so helpful to always understand what's going on in depth.
Okay.
I actually picked up a lot of the scientific journals. I really, grounded myself again in the research on, what is coronavirus, how does it work? What are the mechanics behind it? What we need to be afraid of? What are the things that we don't need to be afraid of? And also, what are the likely scenarios that this is going to play out? And I think that really informed our planning as a company and put us on a pretty robust footing. And I think the other thing is, from a shareholder point of view, it was also quite helpful because I could instill comfort and calm because I understood, not only the business side of tourism, but also, the pandemic itself, and could answer all of the questions around it. So yes, it's certainly, it's helped a lot. And I'm very thankful to have had that education.
Okay. Last item really, to kind of get your thoughts on really. In April, you were kind of fairly robust about what you thought you would have to do as a business in terms of number of staff to get through things. And I can't remember if it was you or your co-founder Tao said that, we don't feel that we need to make any layoffs. And, and sadly, 6 months later, I think it was October, there was, a number of layoffs. I mean, what was the thinking behind either proclaiming very early on that you were going to be okay and then having to change your mind, or how did that all kind of unravel? Because it was very sad for those that did have to depart in the autumn, but you were very firm early on that you wouldn't have to do that. Was it just because the pandemic was over an extended time frame?
Yeah, so I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding, to be honest, and I'm not very happy how this was phrased. And I think, that's our fault, to be honest. Like, we should have phrased this differently back then. I think what we wanted to say back then is no matter which scenario, happens, whether the pandemic stays for 2 or 3 years or, for 1 year, GetYourGuide as a company will be fine. This was kind of turned or worded, and I think this was a mistake, into there will never be any layoffs. So that's obviously a stupid claim to make because no one can ever guarantee that. Yeah. And I think what happened was we actually didn't lay off anyone in first or second or third quarter of the pandemic. It was clear though from the onset that then moving into 2021 there are different scenarios, and there would have been a scenario where we could have continued not to lay off anyone. But the reality is there are parts of our business that just don't exist right now and that will not exist for the foreseeable future. We had offices around the world and countries where we will not do any business, and most likely in 2021. Yeah. And then the question is, should we actually keep these operations? And just from a purely economic point of view, it doesn't make any sense. And this is a very painful decision, I think, for all of us to take, but it was I think one that was inevitable. And hence we adjusted. But I would say from the basic premise of GetYourGuide being in a very stable financial position, and this is, by the way, regardless of the incremental fundraise that we did, we could, with comfort ride out this pandemic in a way that I think very few other companies could. And this is, I think, what we wanted to say. And I think that was true back then and it's true today.
Yeah. And interesting, I think, is how do you go about kind of almost rebuilding a business. And this is, I'm interested in two perspectives from you on this. One is rebuilding a business that operates in your particular sector, tours, activities and attractions, tickets, and also rebuilding a business, the business itself. How have you started thinking about that and how you position yourself into next year?
Yeah, I think in Germany, we have a good sense of what it means to rebuild. I mean, we've rebuilt the entire country after 45. And I think in a way, the analogy actually holds in a way that, a lot of people look at Germany and say, wow, what a stellar success after World War II. But, when you ask our grandparents, what they will tell you is there was a lot of really good substance, right? I mean, we were not rebuilding into the unknown. We were rebuilding on, what was a great foundation. And I think in tourism, what the new reality all comes back to is what is the foundation of the company. And, if I ask myself one question through the pandemic, when you hit, ground zero, what is the reason why you should exist for your customers? What is the reason why you should come back? Because it's not going to be your investors or a bank that's going to fund you out of the pandemic. It's going to be your customers. And if they come back, your business is going to be fine. So the recovery and how we formulated it was all around, how can we serve customers in this new normal, and how can we be a better company after the pandemic compared with before the pandemic?
And how do you become a better company?
I think there were a couple of fundamental trends that we actually saw accelerated because of COVID that we saw before, but that are even clearer today. Number one, regional and domestic travel is here to stay. And I think, our broader industry, which is very much shaped by the top destinations around the globe, is going to be more distributed in the future. And I think COVID was something that was almost a catalytic event for that. We saw that in the numbers already pre-corona, that our long tail was consistently growing really fast and outgrowing the top cities. But we're seeing it even stronger now. I don't think we will have the same mass tourism in the top cities for the foreseeable future. And I also don't think we will have as much intercontinental travel for the foreseeable future, which has to do with airline capacities, but I think also with a different attitude towards travel. I do think, and I personally also recognize that there's a lot of beauty around where we live. And, if we want to move towards a more carbon neutral society, then, most likely we'll need to change our travel patterns. And I think that's something that we really started to adjust during Corona, is just beefing up our local inventory and being more appealing for regional travelers. And I think that's the first trend. I think the second trend that we've seen is huge technological acceleration. We decided not to cut down on tech investments. In fact, we've doubled down. We're spending more on tech this year than we spent last year, despite, obviously completely deteriorated revenues. And the reason for that is we see last minute bookings, flexibility, a great search experience for customers, good recommendations, good personalization is becoming ever increasingly important when you have travelers that are now 80% on their mobile devices or even more. Before the pandemic, the booking rates that we've had on mobile and smartphones were half. So you can imagine it's a completely different product now. Before, it was much more around planning and making sure that I can browse the full catalog. And today it's much more on I have very short mind share. I'm on my mobile device, I'm traveling very soon. What can GetYourGuide offer me? And solving that problem is definitely something that I think will occupy us for the coming years, because it's very complicated if you go into the details of real-time availability and cancellation and rebookings and customer service, etc. And that's, I think, something where we have a ton of expertise in and that we need to further improve. And then lastly, I think it's taking the supply community with us on this journey is, I think, the big change. We've been for, I would say, the better half of 10 years, been purely focused on the customer. And that has served us very well. But we understood that, with this pandemic, yes, we need to focus on the customer, and need to continue to work on the customer experience, but it will not work unless we take the supply community into the new normal as well. So we actually started to do a lot of education for suppliers, We started a Get Your Guide supply blog, webinars, a newsletter. We really tried to push out as much knowledge as possible to the suppliers, and also help in weathering the storm, so that, you know, when we get to the other side, you know, it's useless if just Get Your Guide gets to the other side. Our supply community also needs to get to the other side. Otherwise, there's no product for customers. So, you know, that was, I think, the third leg.
Now, and maybe an interesting, maybe dilemma is the wrong word, but I'll phrase it as that is, you know, you talk about there was an obvious focus on targeting your domestic audience, and I wonder whether yourself and, you know, your peers in the tours and activities sector have, until now, have been very much perceived as being for international travelers. So I would happily look at Get Your Guide or Klook or TripAdvisor or whoever. If I was going overseas to a destination, I automatically wouldn't do so if I was thinking of something to do in London, which is
Absolutely
50 miles down the road. So how did you re-engineer and flip what you do to target the German market, for example?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. I think, you know, our business was more than 40% international travel before the pandemic. And, you know, a minority share came from domestic travel. This automatically flipped, you know, because now people didn't have the choice. And I think, you know, there's a strong future for international travel, don't get me wrong. And I think we have a strong place there too. Yet at the same time, I see this change towards more regional and domestic as an opportunity, because we will be traveling a lot more in the future. I think it will be just shorter trips, and it will be closer to home. And, you know, that's, I think, what I see as an opportunity to engage more with the customer instead of less, because we only take, you know, one international trip a year, maybe every 2 years. And, you know, getting that really loyal fan base and this audience is much harder in that context than if you can engage with them 3 times a year or 4 times a year. So I'm relatively optimistic that, you know, our value proposition holds, because at the end of the day, Get Your Guide stands for a high quality customer experience with the best curated experiences, you know, for you to select from. And I think at the end of the day, whether that's, you know, for me in Berlin where I live, or whether it is in southern Germany, Austria, or whether that is in Rio de Janeiro, you know, that value proposition holds. And I found out that I know a lot less about my country and the things that I can do in my country than I thought. And I think if we can bring that diversity and that richness of inventory to our customers, then they will greatly appreciate it. And I think then at the end of the day, it's a product and tech question, and a question of account management and onboarding. And those are questions that we've solved in the past. And I think we will also solve this again in this new context.
How do you tackle your own kind of international expansion ambitions? Because they were fairly robust and, you know, aggressive almost up until, you know, earlier this year. Do you have to kind of rein those in now and concentrate on where you were originally and those domestic markets and things like that? Or do you still have some kind of international ambitions to accelerate those at some point?
I think we still have, I mean, look, we're the market leader in pretty much every single European country. And you know, I think today a strong number 2 in the US with ever increasing market share. I think that picture won't change greatly after the pandemic, I think, if at all, in our favor. So I think our international strategy, to be honest, hasn't changed, and our ambition level hasn't changed. I think if something has changed, then maybe the time frame, you know, by when we will get there. Yet I think, again, like, we will be a better company coming out of this crisis. I think today I'm pretty convinced about that, and I can't wait to go back to growth mode and serve more customers.
Yeah, I can't wait to go back to traveling per se, I think.
And you're our guest.
You're very kind. I mean, what is your kind of perspective on this kind of tours and activities intermediary landscape? I mean, it got very busy leading up to 2019. There were some huge sums of money coming in by way of investment to both yourselves and to Klook. Booking.com was getting very aggressive. TripAdvisor has always had its ambitions and its Viator brand. I mean, how does that kind of sector as a whole kind of shake out in a kind of a recovery scenario?
Yeah, so I think we've had plenty of competition and lots of great companies in the sector pre-pandemic, and I think we'll have a lot of great companies afterwards. I mean, I would also name Airbnb, who are just going public, and who I think are coming with a very innovative product approach into the sector. Booking.com, I think, is working on it as part of their connected trip experience. So lots of people who are trying. I think what most people underestimate is the complexity of the sector. It's a very heterogeneous inventory that is much less standardized than a hotel, and it's much less of a commodity, right? So I can stay in London, where you live, and stay in like the worst Airbnb or in the worst hotel and still have a great experience in London. You cannot go to London and book the wrong tours and have a great experience. I mean, that's just not going to fly. So we have a different quality promise than I think other brands who are at other points of the travel value chain. And I think most companies underestimate that. So the experience of building technology and working with suppliers and customers in our space is very much undervalued. So I think, from that sense, I think the, incumbents, if you want to call us, or like the people who've been in there for longer, have an inherent advantage, because we've been dealing with this now for quite a while. And I think we'll be coming out fine out of the crisis, and then, maybe more funding will happen, maybe not. We'll see. I think at the end of the day, the customer decides, and that's the beauty about business, right? No matter how much you raise, no matter what your valuation is, it really depends on the customer. And I'm pretty confident, based on, what I've seen in January, February this year, and then, what I've seen, with the workforce and what we've produced since COVID hit, that, when the new reality happens, we'll be in a good place. And if I know one thing for sure, that is that people will crave experiences when they come out of lockdown. I think that is absolutely certain.
Yeah, I don't think people are just going to fly or get a train somewhere and then not do anything, for sure. So, one thing that you did do in the run up over the last couple of years that was an attempt to kind of put yourself some distance between yourselves and the competition was branded tours. So you Get Your Guide, you could turn up to the Charles Mihal and there would be someone there, a Get Your Guide person that would be doing it for you. I mean, how does that kind of shake out? Is that something that you're still interested in? Because it's potentially resource heavy. You need to work with suppliers and rebrand them. How does that all kind of play out now?
Yeah, we've tried to get closer relationships with both our top attraction and museum suppliers, as well as with the tour companies that we operate with, and we're constantly innovating on the ways how we work with them. And I think GetYourGuide Originals is a core part of our DNA, and it will stay that way. And I think if at all, it will grow over time. Yet I think the way how we look at GetYourGuide Originals is that that is the innovation hub of the company, and how we make an impact on the broader industry. We are in this position that I often compare our company to Netflix, right? That we have like all these customers, and we have the data, and we understand what's great for them and what they rate highly and what's engaging. And now we can use that to build better products with our suppliers. And that is very much the strategy behind GetYourGuide Originals, is create more engagement so that the pie grows. And that is what we've done repeatedly in the past, that we've worked with local suppliers, we've helped them improve their product, improved customer satisfaction, and thereby increased our overall volumes that we had for a specific point of interest, for a specific tour, for a specific attraction. And I think that's a winning formula that will continue to iterate on and improve over time after the pandemic.
Okay, before we move on, were you happy to take an audience question? So
absolutely, very happy
to. Johannes, you mentioned the mindset of planning a trip has changed. Do you think the travel cycle, dreaming, planning, booking, experiencing, and sharing, has changed due to the pandemic? And if so, how?
I don't. So, first of all, I don't think that this linear mindset that you're just describing ever existed in the travel industry. I think that's a slide that we have all drawn for investors to kind of illustrate a point.
Yeah.
But the reality is, these phases are interwoven. So you're planning, and you're dreaming, and you're sharing, and you seek advice, and you book, and maybe you go on vacation, and then in destination maybe you plan some more, right? So it's not. This is like stage 1, 2, 3, and done. And different brands, I think, cater to different needs along that cycle or, along those processes. GetYourGuide, I think, being incredibly strong at the planning and booking stage. I mean, this is very clearly where we play, and this can be, shortly before the trip or even on trip. And I think the change that I'm speaking about today is that the time period from planning to booking to experiencing, that has compressed. Mm-hmm. And I think this is not something that necessarily will change after the pandemic. If we look to Asia, which I think, in many ways, is a bit, where we're moving in the Western world, because they've just leapfrogged the desktop stage and went straight to mobile. I think that's what you're seeing, 80%, 90% mobile traffic, or, people being on apps, pre-booking times for even hotel reservations or flights for just a couple of days, experiences all, very last minute. And I think that's frankly what we need to get accustomed to also in the West.
And let's change gear a little bit if we can, Johannes. You've been fairly outspoken, particularly this year, about Google. And I think maybe it would be worth initially if you'd kind of talk us through what your kind of thoughts are on their influence, or what are they doing that kind of fires you up so much that you've been very public with some of your comments and thoughts on them?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, let me be clear that Google is a fantastic company, and that, we've had a very strong partnership for more than 10 years, and GetYourGuide wouldn't be here without them and their technology today. We wouldn't have ever had the opportunity to reach as many customers. Yep. And, our teams continue to collaborate on a daily basis in a very good way, working on the most innovative products, particularly when it comes to search advertisement and how we can leverage that to reach more customers. What triggered it for me was the beginning of COVID, when Google was unwilling to help travel companies and just said, we're the advertising companies, please pay the bills. Because that to me was in stark contrast to their behavior and how they want to get our data to build products in search. That primarily help Google position themselves more as an OTA, so as an intermediary itself, and capture as much of the customer as possible and keep them in their walled garden. And to me, I think partnership is fine, but then we need to have clearly defined rules, and you can't have a search engine that has more than 90% market share in Europe, and that clearly does not have competition, suddenly stepping on the turf of all of the OTAs who are really in competition with each other, and trying to take away the customers and keep them loyal to Google forever. I think we have a clear responsibility at GetYourGuide to ensure a fantastic customer experience, which we do even in times of great crisis. And Google has the obligation to be a good utility as a search engine, and that's what they should pursue. I think suddenly turning that utility into something else and stepping onto our turf is a red line that I don't believe should be crossed, and that's what I was very outspoken about.
So how does that then shake out? You've made your thoughts known publicly. Google's got its own kind of idea and the way it wants to run its business. I mean, it's almost like an impasse now, isn't it? I mean, how does it shake out?
Well, we'll see. I think, the ball is very much in the court of Google. I think it's very clear, where we stand. And, we've also had multiple discussions, by the way, before going public on this with Google itself. Yeah. And, I think it's very clear that, Google does not want to change right now. I think that there will be more pressure that's needed for them to truly change. It is a very large company right now. And when they look at a market, for them, an opportunity starts north of 100 billion, right? Anything else is not big enough. Which means that they need to go really deep into the value chain for any product moves to make sense. And I think that's what you see here. I think fundamentally, we as societies need to think about what we want our future to look like. Do we want a future where we have a search engine that, also dominates vertically all of the verticals that they are in, thereby greatly decreasing choice for customers, and in the long term, obviously driving up prices, because if Google captures the full value chain, they will, decrease choice and thereby obviously, increase their ability and leverage to, in the long run, generate more profits and sort of like control the price of the industry. which I don't think is the right future. So I think actually the current state where we have an Airbnb, a Booking.com, a TripAdvisor, a GetYourGuide, all competing for the customers and competing on the customer experience is much better for the customer, because ultimately that will generate innovation and growth. If everything is in the hands of one player, I think innovation will be hampered. I think we will see long-term increases in prices. And I think it's for the worst of the industry. And that, I think, is the statement where we were quite deliberate. It's, by the way, not only Johannes Reck saying this. This is the same statement that you will see from every single person in the travel industry who doesn't work at Google. And I think it's increasingly clear to regulators that this is also a problem. And we'll see what will happen. But I think Corona was a turning point, was truly an inflection point in that story. And that was because you could see that when the rubber hit the road, when you really needed to refund tens of millions of customers, when you needed to man the customer service phones, Google was not willing to do that, but just pushed that straight onto its partners, no questions asked. And I think that was really the turning point where it was clear, if you behave like that in a crisis, we know what your game plan is, right? And then we will push hard against it. And I think they now heard the message, and we'll see what they'll do.
It's often a foolish strategy to rely on regulators, though, to regulate something. Is there a sense, Johannes, therefore, that, I mean, you still spend money with Google in the same way that Booking still spends money with Google, and Expedia and Klook and everybody else on Trip?
Yeah, Kevin,
if you could collectively stop spending money on Google because you're still feeding the beast that you are, or is it because you have to feed the beast that is now competing against you?
So let me be clear, Kevin, I don't rely on the regulator to solve this problem for us. I do think, we as societies, will need to find a solution for Google, because even outside of the travel, this is a greater problem, right? We'll have the same problem in cloud computing, we'll have the same problem in AI, so like it's not only travel. And I think having 25% of the S&P 500 made up by 4 companies in the US is not a healthy state of being. And if that share just grows and grows over time, I think ultimately, the DOJ needs to ask itself some questions of what they will do. And I think that will happen. I think in terms of the travel industry, we need to build great products, period. I think, that's our duty to customers. And I think, frankly, we have a lot of tailwinds as well. So GetYourGuide mobile app adoption has grown tremendously over time. So our respective Google share has actually declined, not increased. So I don't see it fundamentally as a problem to our business, as long as we get customers to come direct to GetYourGuide and us serving them incredibly well so that they want to come again. So from my vantage point, it's not as drastic of a problem as long as we do our job. So it's really in our hands. And by the way, this is also how I internally position it to the employees or to the shareholders. I always tell them, the regulator is going to do what they're going to do. I'll be very vocal about what I think is the right thing here. And, we will team up even with our competitors, to make sure that there is this even level playing field that we all want to compete with our competitors, in a fair and decent way. And, that would exclude Google simply because they are a monopoly in search and they are above all of us. But that said, I personally will win this battle, not through the regulator, but we will win this through our product and through our customer relationships. And that's what I deeply believe in.
That's very interesting what you just said about teaming up with maybe some of your competitors. I mean, one of the things that was frankly very impressive about the Airbnb filing last week was just the amount of direct business that they get. And part of that, I guess, is just the strength of the brand. I mean, I'm assuming that's you've got a strong brand, but that's a real benchmark for any either existing company or new company coming into travel to aim for, is just to really try and push the brand so that you don't have to rely on whether it's Google or whoever for your traffic. Right? It is the direct business is the goal.
I mean, honestly, I can just say hats off to Brian, Nate, and Joe for building such an amazing business and, for building such a big brand. I think what they've done is the gold standard in travel, period. And I think anyone else can just dream of having a similar type of loyal audience as Airbnb. And I think if there's something to be learned from Airbnb, it is that you shouldn't overly focus just purely on conversion rate optimization. You shouldn't overly just focus on playing the Google game. I think you should really focus on your brand and your meaning to the customer. And it's something that GetYourGuide didn't do early on, and there was very good reason for that back then. Because back then we were playing in some European countries. It's very difficult to build a brand in multiple countries at once, particularly coming out of Europe, having limited funding, resources, etc. So for us, their playbook was not applicable in the early days. We're certainly looking to them now as one of the role models in terms of what the next steps for our company are.
And if we can change gear a final time, then Johannes, if we can. So there's been a lot of talk this year about hitting the reset button as an industry, and we're talking much more big picture now rather than specifically GetYourGuide. And from where I sit, I think this is an opportunity for, and we wrote an editorial on this last week. This is an opportunity for travel to really take a long, hard look at itself with the threat of the problems that are emanating from sustainability or lack of sustainability in this industry that I write about and you operate in, and we are actively asking people to, fly to lots of places and do various things. How do you view that opportunity? Do you think it's one that is being embraced by the industry quite firmly, or do you think it's kind of let's just recover first of all and get things going again and get operational, and then we'll come back to sustainability and what Greta is saying? I'm being flippant here, but do you I know probably what you hope for, but do you sense that the industry wants to hit the reset button when it comes to sustainability and the goals around it?
I think right now we're all very much focused on survival and how we get out of this as a broader industry, I think. And I don't think there's such a thing as the reset button because, there are plenty of families to feed off of the tourism revenues globally. And I think, we need to be cognizant of that. I think when we talk about sustainable travel, and, trust me, it's a massive topic in my company. I have to answer questions about it almost at every single all hands meeting. I think we need to be mindful that, we have an increasing divide in most societies, and we also have an increasing divide between the, rich and developed world, and particularly the segments that are doing well, like tech, versus the developing world. And it's also not sustainable to, move travel into the luxury category and just make great travel accessible for a few, and thereby exclude, hundreds of millions of people who work in the more traditional, sun and beach, or whatever you may want to call it, type of travel chain parts. And so for me, the question is more, how can we build innovative technology so that we can broaden the value proposition in a more sustainable way, and lift people into this new reality. And trust me, there are lots of small steps that you can take that already make a very big difference. For example, I give you a GetYourGuide example. We have last year launched the GetYourGuide Eco Badge. It's relatively simple to get. You just need to get audited, by one of the NGOs, which is free, which we provide you with, and they will make sure that you run your tour on a more sustainable standard, meaning you don't have throwaway things, on the tour. We don't litter. The places, that we visit, we leave them better. We have introduced a donation feature so that, people can donate to specific attractions or landmarks and so on. So I think lots of small steps already make a meaningful impact. And if we all embrace the journey that we need to get to a world where travel is more sustainable, both from a carbon footprint as well as from a destination footprint. So, what is the footprint that I as a traveler leave in the destination? And if we all work towards that, then over, I think, a time frame of 10 to 20 years, it's going to be meaningfully better. I think what we should not embrace is that, tomorrow we need to reset and everything needs to be different, and, flight prices need to be 5 times, what they currently are, because that, I think, is a very arrogant view to take a look at the world, because that excludes a lot of people from travel. And what I've learned from COVID is travel is almost like a human, behavior, and certainly something that people feel that, they must have to live a healthy and rich life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't give it to people for a year, I think, you really deprive them of a fundamental need. And I think, that's not going to fly, also not in the new normal. So I think we should rather think about how can we grow the pie sustainably than how can we shrink it.
Okay. So it's more of a grassroots way of getting things done rather than a coordinated approach.
I don't think that coordination, to be honest, has ever worked at a greater scale in travel. It's such a massive market with so many pockets. So I think we rather all need to agree on the principles as an industry and how we want to operate. And that really works. And it's many, many small steps. Like another small example, we all, as tours and activities platforms, a couple of years ago decided that we'd just ban all animal related tours, where you torture animals, like, elephant
riding
tours, etc. That was like a classic one, very quickly adopted around the globe. And that's also, by the way, always what I tell all of the NGOs: continue to lobby for your causes. Maybe they won't be heard today, but maybe in 2-3 years, you'll hit the right tone and it's the right time, and then everyone goes the next step. And I think we just need to all move forward and commit to that journey, and we need to commit to that being a process. And I'm very committed to that. I think GetYourGuide is very committed to that, and we'll take multiple steps in that direction in the years to come.
Okay, so a final audience question before we get to my last question, Johannes, if we can. So our audience member says, the industry is not digitalized particularly much. How will our experience as travelers look when we start traveling again, imagining that the industry is more digitalized than it was at the end of 2019? I think one of the reports was saying, the digitalization of society has accelerated more in the last 5 months than it has in the last 5 years. So, so how will the process, do you think, change if we have become a more digitalized society and industry?
Yeah, totally. I think we saw a glimpse of that in the summer. So number one, I can only repeat it, to anyone in the industry: mobile. I think we will be a much more mobile focused industry than we were before the pandemic. At GetYourGuide, I constantly report bugs for our desktop website simply because we never look at it anymore when we design new features. We just basically purely look at the mobile screen and how that plays out for the customer. So it will be very last minute, it will be very mobile, and thereby we need to grab the customer's attention span in a much shorter period of time with really compelling content. While so like the optimization on the technology side for that last minute use case will be big, I think on the content side we really need to up level our game to better and richer new formats. I think video will be a very strong theme of the coming years, because people through new technologies like TikTok, for instance, YouTube, are really consuming travel content in very new forms, very different to what we've seen with guidebooks, etc., and in the decades prior. And then I think the new normal that we really need to adjust to as an industry is that I think when people start to travel again, they will really go on experience binges. So I think like people will literally start to book a lot of different experiences when they go instead of just one. And that's a pattern that we've seen before. Before, like the GetYourGuide, like the strategy originally was, let's make sure we have the lighthouse attraction in the city and then maybe like one other adjacent tour to, upsell or cross-sell. Today we look at it much more holistically, because not only do people go to more destinations, also within destinations, they tend to spread, much more evenly across different parts of the city. And it's part of our job to make sure that there will be no lines in the future, right? So like the best skip the line product I want to sell is there is no line, because everything is time ticketed. We will be embracing a lot more yield management to lure customers in when we have low demand, and to make sure that we optimize our earnings, but also push people away when there's high demand, right? These type of mechanics, will really kick in, and we've started to develop them already. We've deployed them very successfully with a lot of our partners, and I think that's certainly the direction that I see, travel moving in. Much more real time, much more dynamic and much more connected across the entire value chain.
Okay, and a last quick one from me. I mean, you've overseen GetYourGuide for over 10 years or just under 10 years. You've raised a lot of money. I don't think you're allowed to call yourself a startup anymore based on those two factors at least. But I mean, what advice would you give to a startup that's kind of been going through a similar thing this year as they look forward into next year? You've explained about what you want to do and how you want to position yourself, but companies that are much younger than you, what kind of guidance would you give to the founding team of those startups, if you can be very general about it?
Sure. I think resilience and learning from failure are the key things that any startup founder, COVID or no COVID, needs to have. It certainly helped me weather the storm, is that I had this experience of the prior 10 years where there were many years that weren't as easy as it might look like today from the outside. And as a startup, you will have many setbacks, and it's less about avoiding setback than embracing failure and learning from it and understanding what your next step is. So I keep on having this very Zen attitude that I think is really helpful to do this, that I always ask myself, with that being so, right? For example, COVID, with COVID being so what? What's the next step? And it's not about, oh my God, why did this happen, and what could be different, and what, etc. Ultimately, you can't change the past. You can only change the future. And I think the people who are not successful as entrepreneurs are the ones that get stuck in the past and don't really turn themselves consistently towards the future.
Okay, we'll be back to you in a second, Johannes, but our thanks once again to Medallia, who've been supporting this series over the last month and a half or so. You can use text messaging to remove non-essential interactions, provide a superior sense of safety, and deliver an unrivaled guest experience. Again, thank you very much to Medallia. You can check them out and find out more at medallia.com. We wish you all the best, Johannes, for 2021. We're almost there. The hideous 2020 is finally behind us, almost. We wish you all the best, and most of all, thank you very much for spending your time with us on New Reality with this afternoon.
Great speaking with you, Kevin. Have a great day.
Okay, take it easy.